has kind of gotten on. I apologize to Esther and to anyone else who was confused because of the the newsletter. But we are going to be today. Let me just put us up onto Facebook. We are going to be covering the historical period that is my favorite. And I would say this again, if I could go back in time to any period, if I could go forward or back in time, I would say I would want to go back to this period. I would want to see the period that we're going to be talking about today. The rabbinic period, which, I mean, the whole rabbinic period covers about 500 years, but specifically the period of time that saw a horrible event, the destruction of the temple, but also the beginning of Christianity, the rise of a new faith that came out of Judaism. And we're not going to talk too much about the beginnings of Christianity because we're going to do that soon. We're going to be talking on a special session about Christianity and Judaism, which will probably be a two-parter, one looking at the history of it and also looking at the theological and philosophical and practical differences between the faiths. But so I'm not going to dwell a lot on the Christian um, beginnings today, but we will mention it. We will talk about it, and we will it will resonate for people who know a little bit about it already and who you know are interested in the subject. I promise you, we'll come back to it. So and Philip, I guess, is not on here right now, but he just asked about the um, Europe meeting, whether it was going to be recorded, and it will be too. So for people back on that subject, it will be recorded. But anyways, back to what we're talking about tonight, which is um, the the rabbinic period. Um, I want to say that the first period that we the first period that in um, our first history class was about the biblical period. Then we last week we talked about the period from kind of the end of the biblical history, the end of the first temple, and the beginning of the Persian period, and we went all the way up to this period. And so let me just share right now what we the timeline that I shared with people last time, which is this timeline, which I actually redid, just so you know. I decided to put Herod in it, and I made this a little different. So I've uploaded a revised one of these timelines. So last week we started here with the Jews coming back, stuff that is in the Bible, the very last parts of the Bible, Ezra, Nehemiah, and the books of Chronicles, and then that's to about here, and then we talked about the Greek period, um, the Maccabean period, which we talked about in a whole session that you could go back and watch about Hanukkah, their dynasty, um, kind of left off right about here, which is where we're going to finish with, which is the last half of it, the period of time that goes from about 100 BCE to about 500 to 600 BCE, the rabbinic period. And so this is kind of what we're going to be talking about. And to some extent, there's historical sources. We're going to look at some of the sources on this. We mentioned one of the most important sources on this part of history is Josephus Flavius, who was a Jew who fought in the war and lived during this period of time. And and we also have some discussion about it in the Talmud, in the rabbinic sources. And then we have Roman sources on it as well, purely Roman sources. I mean, one can make the argument Josephus is as Roman as he is Jewish to some extent, but you could say he is biased for the Jews, and he is definitely biased. He's writing from the standpoint of trying to make the Romans understand why the Jews should be respected and regarded highly. So understand that he does have an agenda. And what we're talking about though today and why it's so significant, and again, why I would have wanted to see like what really happened is because this period of time, 2000 years ago, essentially drives the world that we have today in the sense that there is no Christianity unless this happens. There is the seeds of Western civilization to some extent are planted within the world because of the confrontation and what happens out of that confrontation between the Jews and the Romans. The world we live in today as Americans is completely um, fused together to some extent the Roman and Jewish values. If you look at our country, if you go to Washington, D.C., you see this classical Greco-Roman style architecture everywhere because to some extent we were establishing the fact that we were based on some similar concepts, but also that we're establishing to some extent our greatness. But underneath that is a commitment and a devotion to the text. And again, I have right by my bedside the book that the Schulmans were, reminded me about that is out now. It's the Jewish Roots for American Democracy, and it's a book that reminds us that as much as the outer trappings of our country, to some extent, were built along with a nod to the Roman Empire, the actual values are very Jewish, and to some extent, we say Judeo-Christian, but there's a lot of stuff here which is based on um, on our text and on our values. And the bigger issue, which is this commitment to a text, is what and to the idea that these values are enshrined in a document is very much why the Constitution has been a focal point for our country and hopefully will continue to be a focal point for our country as long as it exists. Declaration of Independence or in the Constitution that these documents are our greatest national treasures. So there's a lot here that's very important for us to consider because it's all around us today. And how many things can we say are 2,000 years old? How many things can we look at and say, well, the effect of this is everywhere, and it happened 2,000 years ago. So it's very important, and we'll jump into it now. So as we look at this timeline, and again, kind of where we are right here in this, um, let's take a look real quick at what we're talking about here, which is after Alexander the Great's kingdom was split up into many pieces, um, the generals of his army and his successors all fought amongst themselves for power. And we got you now, Esther. We were just about to jump into the map. Apologies again, Esther, for going to the temple first. You got home in time to be with us now. So thank you, Esther. Um, we're um, we're just starting and looking at this map, which is this is the Roman Empire a little bit later than what we're talking about, which is about 117, but right around the time the temple is destroyed in 70, from about 100 to BCE to about 180. This is pretty close to what it looked like. Now you can see Israel's right here, Judea, and Mesopotamia is here. That was kind of the extent of it. But the Roman Empire is all of North Africa, all the way around to Morocco, up to Spain, up across Western Europe, all the way to the border here where the Germanic tribes are keeping the Romans out, all the way down across to here where there are Slavic and Gothic and other types of people that will not let the Romans cross, but all of Asia Minor, all of Turkey, right? All the way up through the Caucasus. These are all areas that are controlled by the Roman Empire. And you can see the Mediterranean is the heart of the Roman Empire. And so the Roman Empire is linked by ports on all of these places and roads that go along the coast that link them. But it's difficult to explain how amazing the Roman Empire was unless again we overlay it, and I showed you what the Assyrian Empire looked like, what the Persian Empire looked like. And again, you know what? Let me just show you by way of comparison, real quick. Let me show you what uh, what that looked like. Any I mean, do you understand how like significant this is? I mean, virtually almost every part of Europe, definitely any part of Europe that had anything remotely close to
That sounds
organized
awesome.
civilization had this was part of the Roman Empire. Somebody's I got background noise from somebody there. Sorry.
Uh-huh.
Sorry about that. I just got it taken care of. But I just want to show you real quick. I'll show you the Persian Empire as a comparison. Um, this is how big the Persian Empire was. You can see it was like a fraction of how big the Roman Empire is, because all of this area, all the way over to here, all throughout Northern Africa, all of Western Europe was also part of the Roman Empire. So the Persian Empire was enormous, and the Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Great was even bigger. But it didn't last for long. It only lasted until he died. And once he died, it all came apart. So the empire of Alexander the Great really didn't last that long. But the Roman Empire is enormous, enormous. And why is this so important? Because when we're talking about what happened to our ancestors 2,000 years ago, when they went to war against Rome, you almost have to ask yourself, were they out of their minds? I mean, what did they think? How did they think that they were going to beat the Romans? One tiny little part of the empire, a little outpost. How did they think they were going to do this? And again, according to Josephus, part of it was the fact that the leadership of the Jewish people at the time was so fractured, there was so much internal dissension that it wasn't like there was a unified Jewish army that was fighting against the Romans anyways. Not all the people in Israel, in the province of Judea, even wanted to fight against the Romans. So the idea that like there was a unified idea that they had to fight. I mean, they were literally. I mean, I'll just tell you now, when the war starts in 66, there are cities that have said we're fighting against Rome. But then there were other cities and other villages that said we're not part of this. And they would literally tell the Romans, "Hey, we're on your side. We're not trying to revolt." And then, hopefully leave us alone. Some of those were not. Sometimes the Romans destroyed those places anyways, but in some cases they were left alone. We had a similar thing that went on here in this country when we had a revolt against the British. I mean, there were people that were not on board with the revolt, but most, the support for the revolution was a little bit greater than it was for the Jewish revolt. And quite frankly, the Romans were much, much larger than the British Empire. And not only that, the Roman Empire completely surrounded them. The Americans were separated from Britain by an entire ocean. And without, again, I mean, there were troops that were coming in from Canada, from the north, but for the most part, British reinforcements could take months and months. The Romans would literally pour in troops from all around the empire into Judea to quash this revolt. So, again, Josephus wrote a book called The Battle of the Jews, which is just about this war. I mean, it's a massive undertaking and it's filled with information. It's difficult to read, it's not an easy read, but it is a book that is literally only about the war. As I mentioned, he then went back and wrote something called the Antiquities of the Jews, which was Jewish history up to that point, which is an amazing history. And it's where we get, in some cases, the only places that we learn about some of the history of our people during that kind of time when we just don't know what else was happening. Now, so Josephus, we talked a little bit about last time because of the history that he kept, but he lives during this period. He's writing during this period. He started out as a Jewish general. Once the war was underway, he was captured by the Romans, and according to the Romans, they kind of took care of him afterwards. According to Josephus, he literally went to Vespasian, who was the Roman general at the time, and said, "You're not only going to be successful in this campaign against us, because if you can beat us, God must have chosen you." He said, "You are going to be the emperor of Rome." Now, that was a great thing for him to say because Vespasian, of course, in the end did become emperor of Rome. And while that was a good bet, no one knew for sure whether Vespasian was going to be emperor. But that's one of the main reasons why the Jews started the revolt in the first place. There was such chaos in Rome that the Jews thought that perhaps this was the time that they could at least attain some level of autonomy. It was during that period we call the year of the four emperors. There were literally four Roman emperors over the course of 1 year that were fighting amongst themselves for power and for the throne. And what Vespasian did by conquering Judea is he established himself as the legitimate emperor because he had this tremendous victory against this upstart rebellion that, again, was costly for the Romans. The Jewish rebellion failed. It was a disaster, but it cost the Romans a lot of money and they lost a lot of soldiers. That's one of the reasons why they put it down so hard, was because it was a very successful battle for the Jews for a few years. The fact that it went on for 4 years gives you an idea of how costly it was for the Romans. So, again, the Jewish leadership tried to capitalize on that. And remember, at the time, the Jewish leadership was fractured, as I said. You had the priests, we call the Sadducees. They were very powerful. Coming into the war, they were the most powerful group. But even amongst themselves, they were fractured because there was constant fighting for the role of high priest. And there was a constant situation where a priest would pay the Romans to be the priest, and then another person would pay the Romans a little bit more to be the priest, and they would do away with that priest, make a new guy a priest, and it was just a constant turnover, like in some cases 4 or 5 priests in 1 year. This was a disaster for the Jews. And of course, we also have the group of the Pharisees that we call the Pharisees. They are the people who become what we would call the rabbis. They are people who are attached to the teaching the Bible and, again, making sure that Judaism exists not just as a priestly religion, which they didn't try to do away with. They just said, look, we have a much deeper tradition than just the temple. And so while they did not advocate in any way for there to be no temple, they decided and really kind of, and it wasn't like an overnight thing, that Judaism really needs to find a way to be practiced by people who aren't even ever going to go to the temple. So, of course, the Pharisees wind up being, to some extent, the victors out of this, and we'll explain that in a second. The other group we have are the Essenes, who are the people we believe wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were mainly priests. It seems as though they were one of the smaller groups because they were a hard group to get into. You actually had to kind of join this, I wouldn't, it's called a sect, um, a way, a path. But in a lot of ways, it seems a little bit like a cult in the sense that they had a very top-down leadership, and they weren't led by one person. They were led by a series of leaders. And from what we know about them, which, by the way, is mainly from Josephus and mainly from the archaeology, the issue is the rabbis didn't talk about them. Like, we really don't know anything about them. from Jewish sources. It was only through Josephus and through archaeology that's gone on in the last 80 years that we've learned a little bit about the Essenes, especially finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, which we believe they wrote because it's consistent with what Josephus told us about him, and kind of, again, what the archaeology tells us. There was this group that had left Jerusalem, was living in the area around the Dead Sea, and were practicing a form of Judaism that kind of was focused on priestly behavior, even though they didn't have the temple. It seemed like they were disaffected priests who wanted eventually to come back once this horrible period of Roman control was over. How much they wanted to get rid of the Romans, it's difficult to know because they didn't seem to want to have a lot to do with even their other Jewish co-religionists or brothers and sisters. The last group are the group that we call the Zealots, the Sicarii. They're called the Sicarii because they carried a blade. They carried a little sicar, a little blade, and they would kill Romans, and they would also kill Jews that they thought were traitorous Jews. And so Jews were afraid of them. We know a little bit about them from the Talmud, but we also know a lot about them from Josephus because Josephus blames them for the war and for the fact that even if there were Jews who were like along for the ride with this war and kind of backed it, the Sicarii would not stop until they were essentially suicidal in the sense that they didn't their objective was either to die or to get rid of the Romans. There was no negotiation, there was no compromise. They would simply not have anything other than a Roman free area. So these four groups, very well articulated by Josephus. He calls them the four schools. He calls them essentially almost like the Romans would look at philosophies. But we do know that the rabbis talked about how fractious this time was for our people, and we know that these people really had a different take on Judaism. I mean, some were completely devoted to the temple, some were completely devoted to the politics of getting rid of the Romans, and their outlooks were so different. We talk about Reform and Conservative and Orthodox Jews. That this is totally different. These are people who literally would have nothing to do, in some cases, with their co-religionists. And again, are we always worried in the back of our minds that that could happen again? Yeah, yeah, yeah. When we hear some of the stuff that's articulated, especially even today, it worries me that we're heading back down that path where they wouldn't even recognize each other, and in some cases, were willing to kill each other. The rabbis tell us in the Talmud that the reason that the second temple will be destroyed is not because of idolatry. It's not because Jews are not worshiping God correctly, like the first temple. The reason that the second temple is destroyed is because of the hatred that Jews had for each other. What the rabbis called sinat chinam, baseless hatred. And the rabbis say that's why the temple was destroyed, because Jews were fighting other Jews. So the temple was the focal point for everybody. Everybody had some connection. All four groups had some connection to the temple, with maybe the Pharisees being the least connected, but it wasn't like they wanted the temple. There's two tractates of the Mishnah that are just about the temple. There were rabbis who were also priests. So it's not like
You
there
said
was
that they
one
were
direct.
scribes. The Pharisees were scribes.
Yeah, we believe that they were the people that were originally called the Sophrim, the scribes. It seems as though they were also a major part of, or maybe the major constituency of what was called the Sanhedrin. Though the Sanhedrin also seems to be made up of Sadducees. The problem with the Sanhedrin is we really don't know that much about it, how it functioned, or again, how it met. The Christian Bible talks about the Sanhedrin essentially convening to decide Jesus's fate. That 100% didn't happen. The Sanhedrin was not in a position to convene during the time of the Romans, and says in the Christian Bible that it happened during the time of Passover. The Sanhedrin, even in its most active times, never convened during the holidays. So the idea that there was like a special meeting of the Sanhedrin is really a fabrication. It's kind of a way of saying the Jews made this decision with their court to decide Jesus's fate, and it just didn't happen. I mean, we know it, and the Romans knew it. The Romans were the only people who could execute somebody, and that's why in the Christian Bible, it's still the Romans who take Jesus out to crucify him. But this whole concept that the Jews were part of this, you know, conspiracy to kill Jesus or advocated for his death, it's just not based on fact. Even if again he was getting out of line, there's so many Jews that were getting out of line then that one of them wouldn't have really raised eyebrows enough, definitely not enough to have a Sanhedrin. So we normally see these kind of pictures of the temple that are scale models of how big it was, how amazing it was. As we've talked about several times, this is a temple that was built by Herod the Great. And when I say it was built by Herod the Great, he raised the entire temple down. The previous temple, the second temple, this was really a third temple, I would call it. But the second temple, he completely knocked it down to its foundation and rebuilt it. So you wonder, like, how could he have done that? Well, they obviously always had some kind of altar there, but for a couple of years, the temple was kind of torn down to allow for this magnificent structure to be built. And Herod's goal was to build the greatest temple in the world. He told essentially his people, and he was making a statement for all of the Roman Empire, that the Jewish people only have one God. And you know how like everybody has their gods with their temples and like you go to Athens and there's a statue, there's a temple for Athena and there's a temple for Zeus. And the Jews have one God with one temple, and all of the energy goes into that temple. And so we're going to make this temple the greatest temple in the world. And that's what he did. He built the largest temple structure in the world. As it turns out, there were temples that were being built pretty big in other parts of the world, not necessarily this old, but you'll have temple complexes being built in Mexico. You'll have temple complexes built like Angkor Wat in Cambodia. You'll have temple structures that are built along this kind of magnitude. But in the Roman world and the world that kind of we'd recognize as the Greco-Roman world, the foundations of Western civilization, there was no building like this. So let's take a look.
Haven't
Oh,
I
somebody's going
seen
to say something.
some Persian temples that are sort of built on this model? It seems like they.
Well, there were temples in the Middle East and in Asia Minor that were built with similar kinds of architectural styles.
Mhm.
Uh, you're going to see this because what I'm going to do is show you a video. This is a 3D rendering of it. It's actually was done by a Christian site. Um, I'm not exactly sure why Jews are afraid of doing this, but I think it's because there's a tendency that we have in the Jewish community that we don't want to do stuff with this because it's number one going to send a message that we're actually working on this. Like somebody's going to say, "Oh, you see what the Jews are doing? They're planning this." But it also is this kind of idea that look, when God is ready for this to happen, it's going to happen in a big way. But let's not do this. I mean, think about it this way: for the Reform and Conservative Jews, no one's in a big hurry to build the next temple, whatever you want to call it, the next temple. And in the Orthodox world, there's a feeling like God's got to do it. And politically, there's a feeling like if we send this message out that we're trying to build a new temple, people are going to say the Jews are uh, planning to knock down the Dome of the Rock. So let's take a look at a video. This is a very quick video of what the temple looked like, not just a picture or a scale model. So I'm going to share this with you right now. And again, this is based on drawings or drawings that people have done from the Talmud and then from I mean mainly from the Talmud and Josephus's accounts. You see it? So you can see that, right? Video played. Okay.
What was the year of that?
So that is the temple that was destroyed in 70. So that building was destroyed by the Romans, and you can see it was very Roman style, but it was destroyed by the Romans towards the end of the revolt. The revolt ends finally with the destruction of the last Jewish outpost of the Zealots, the Sicarii at Masada. But everyone got to see the video. I mean, the video came through because we were having problems streaming yesterday at the music, but that worked out okay, guys.
It
You
was
saw it?
fine.
Look, you can imagine how excited people were to come in. You know, one of the things you saw at the beginning was the Robinson Arch. That arch is what we can see by the Western Wall today. That arch is what one of the remnants of the architecture that we can see today. So this is based on not just Josephus's accounts, the Talmud's account, but the architecture that we have. All of that is underneath the Haram al Sharif. Everything that you see on that plaza today that you've seen, if you see what looks like again that big open courtyard, that is what was underneath that. And again, what it looked like 2,000 years ago.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
could anyone go in there? So if I was a sheep herder and I wanted to go pray and bring my family, how did that work, do you think?
So we know because the Josephus tells us, the Talmud tells us that every courtyard becomes more and more restrictive. So when the very last thing they took you into was the Holy of Holies, only the priest could go in the Holy of Holies, and only the Kohen Gadol could go behind the last thing it shows was and it doesn't go behind it, is the huge curtain. Behind the curtain was the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest could go in there. Only the priest could go inside the Beit HaMikdash. People could come in front of the Beit HaMikdash. They could come into the area where they offered the sacrifices. Beyond that, there were areas where only people who were only Jews could come into the outer area, and only, so there were parts where a Gentile could come up to the temple, but there's the inner courtyard Gentiles could not come into. So there's a court that was called the court of the Gentiles, where Gentiles could go, but they could not go into the inner court, and then in the inner court, once you get into the temple, only the priest could go in there. So every kind of and I'll post up a map of kind of the circles of holiness, or they weren't circles, but the call them that, because again, every time you step into another place, it becomes more and more exclusive as you get into finally the Holy of Holies. So it is yeah, it's an interesting thing, how they created these precincts, these sacred precincts. I had this thought once, and I should write it down because I think it's hard to explain, and actually, unless you've actually been there, you don't really get it. There's only one place that I've ever been to that has that kind of feeling of, well, some people can go in here, but then you can't go in here. And again, I know that the Mormon temples have a similar issue. There's parts of the temple that a non-Mormon can't go into, but there's usually it's only like a couple of layers of that. The one place that I've seen in my life that I've been to that has these levels of exclusivity, if you will. I mean, I guess, you have them in a nightclub. There's a VIP, and then there's the ultra VIP, they'll do that at nightclubs. But it's usually only like two or three or maybe four levels. Only place that I see that has this, and this is to John's point, is weird, is almost reverse, and that's prison. Prison has a situation when you go into a prison, there's an outer area where only visitors can go to. And then there's the next level where the employees can go to. And, there's another level where only certain employees, that are going to be working with working with inmates who are there for long periods of time. And then there's the ad seg, which is, the solitary confinement. I don't call it that, but call it administrative segregation, where only the most violent, people are, where they keep them behind. And it's almost like you go further and further down this, like, it's almost a reverse of the temple, which is like the darker it gets, the harder it gets, or the scarier it gets. It gets more and more exclusive. And it really is like, and every time you go through another gate, and when I would go into the prisons, every time I'd go into another gate, it was like, okay, well, now I got to get checked again. And it was almost like I felt like I was going into the holy of, like, this must have been where a priest would have said, hey, you can come here, but you can't go any further. And then some other priest would say, no, you can't come in here. So it's weird how that's the only other place I can think of where you get this kind of like, no, you don't go any further. And I'm sure it's like that in some levels of, of the Pentagon, and, you see it in the
How about
movies,
Mecca?
Mission Impossible. Well, yeah, I mean, they're in Mecca though. There's pretty much like really only the area that Muslims can go into, and then the place that where non-Muslims can go into. It's not, there aren't like levels upon layers and layers. Like
Mm.
when you get to like all of these layers, you're just like, oh my gosh, I have to go through another gate, and that's what it seems like the temple was. But it must have been just must have been breathtaking. I mean, I would have loved to have seen it, and then to some extent, it's like, well, how do you? And that's really the question. It's like, how do we continue after this? Like, if this is our temple and this is the focal point for our lives, how did we survive? And to some extent, again, you can see the rabbis succeeded. The other groups did not. How do we survive a religion that's been based on for centuries the sacrifice and the rituals that went on there, and yet we survived? But you know, like, in our minds, I mean, the reason I showed you that video is because I want you to understand that this is not this wasn't like a building that, you go to the temple, or you go to a really beautiful temple. You can go to Temple Emmanuel in New York, whatever, beautiful temple. But it's not that. It's not that. That was unbelievable. And so, as much as the effort to build it and to preserve it, to run it, just took so many people, all the priests, the Levites, all the people who did it. There were a lot of Jews, including some of the rabbis, who said, we can't continue after this. There is no Judaism anymore. The temple is destroyed, and we're not going to continue. But there were people who pointed out, but the first temple got destroyed, and we survived, so we're going to be able to do this. But again, you know, there was this understanding of, to some extent, that, but it's the Romans. This is not the Babylonians. The Babylonians didn't last that long. The Romans, how are we, like, are they ever going to let us come back? And the Romans were around for, well, they were around in Judea for another 500 years. I mean, part of the Roman Empire, as we know, made it all the way to the 14 almost 1500s in the Byzantine Empire. So where are they going to go? Like, how are we ever going to get our autonomy back? How are we ever going to get our temple back? And so there were people who said, we this is over. It's done. And so the loss of the temple was huge. And it required a reinvention of Judaism. It really wasn't just, okay, well, we'll just wait it out. And so they realized that something else had to be done. Now, we studied this in our classes. We studied the Talmud, and we looked at the Talmudic lessons. And what the Jews how the Jews told this story. But I'm going to show you the text right now of how they made it, how we made it. Um, and so this is from the Talmud. This is a Talmudic discussion about this period, and we did look at this um, uh, in one of our classes before, but it was a while ago, and I will show it to you now. Sorry, this is from the Tractate Gittin, which is technically about the get, about divorce documents, but there's a huge discussion about the war against the Romans. Uh, I, it's an amazing little It's a long text, but we're going to look at part of it. Because it's too long. I mean, it's too long for us to look at the whole thing. But we're gonna look at this story right here from Gittin, from the tractate Gittin. So it says Abba Sakara was the leader of the Zealots, also called the Biryoni. Now, Abba Sakara is a nickname. It means the father of the Sakari. It means the head Sakari. Uh, and so we don't really know what his name was because it's a title, the Abba Sakara. And again, these are the Sakari. And it says that the head, Abba Sakara, was the son of the sister of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. It's his nephew. It's another way of saying nephew. They don't have a word for nephew in Mishnaic Hebrew, and this part's in Aramaic. So they say the son of his sister. Yochanan ben Zakkai is the leader of the Pharisees. He's the leader of the rabbis. He's the head rabbi in Jerusalem at the time. Um, Now, first of all, this shows you that people had different sides and different ones of these sects were in the same family. You'd have a brother who was in a different side. Some of you went to the burnt house that we go to in Jerusalem. It shows the family arguing over what to do with the Romans. Some people were on one side, some were on the other side. Well, this family is torn apart by this. The Sakari is his nephew. So Yochanan ben Zakkai sends a message to Abba Sakara and says, "Come to me in secret." He came, and Rabban Yochanan ben, and by the way, the part in bold, remember, for those who've studied with us, if you haven't, you'll learn. That's the part that's actually in the text, is the literal translation. The other parts are not bold because they're added to help us understand it. And so that's like elucidation or it's not interpretation because I mean, I guess at some level it is, but it's to help us understand it. So that's why some of it's bold and some of it's not. So he came, and Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Until when will you do this and kill everyone through starvation?" Right? Why are you doing this? We cannot win. The Romans are going to kill us, and if they don't kill us, they'll starve us out. We'll die. So surrender. That's what he's saying to him. Abba Sakara said to him, "What can I do? For if I say something to them, they will kill me." Right? So the leader of the Sakari says, "I can't do anything about it. It's out of my hands. If I say we're surrendering, they'll kill me." That tells you how real this was and what's going on when people are fighting a force that they can't defeat. Even if they want to surrender, they can't. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Show me a method so that I will be able to leave the city, and it is possible that through this there will be some small salvation." Abba Sakara said to him, "This is what you should do. Pretend to be sick and have everyone come and ask about your welfare so that word will spread about your ailing condition." Some of you remember the story now, right? Afterward, bring something putrid and place it near you so that people will say that you have died and are decomposing. And then have your students bring you to burial and let no one else come so that the zealots not notice that you are still light, as the zealots know that a living person is lighter than a dead person. Interesting. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai did this. Rabbi Eliezer entered from one side and Rabbi Yoshua from the other side to take him out. When they arrived at the entrance of the city on the inside, the guards who were of the faction of the Zealots, Jews, remind you, Jewish soldiers, wanted to pierce him with their swords in order to ascertain that he was actually dead, as this was the common practice. So it says that other people, again, to some extent, were trying to do this. And so they were going to pierce him to see if he's really dead. Jews. Abba Sakara said to them, "The Romans will say that they pierce even their own teacher." The guards then wanted at least to push him to see whether he was still alive, in which case he would cry out on account of the pushing. Abba Sakara said to them, "They will say that we push even their teacher." The guards then opened the gate and he was taken out. So Abba Sakara helps to make sure that there's no testing of whether he's really a dead body. Everybody with me so far?
Hmm.
Okay. This is an amazing story, right? When Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai reached there, the Roman camp, he said, "Greetings to you, the king. Greetings to you, the king, Melech," right? Vespasian said to him, "You are liable for two death penalties. One, because I'm not a king, and yet you call me a king. And furthermore, if I'm a king, why didn't you come to me until now?" And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "As for what you said about yourself, I am not the king. In truth, you are the king. If not now, then in the future. As if you are not king, Jerusalem will not be handed into your hand, as it is written, and the Lebanon shall fall by a mighty one. Lines from Isaiah. And the mighty one means only a king. As it is written, and their mighty one shall be of themselves, and their ruler shall proceed from their midst. Also a text from the prophet Jeremiah. Now notice, this is exactly the same thing that Josephus said happened to him when he saw Vespasian. You know, you kiss up to the guy. And Lebanon means the temple is the estate of the good mountain in the Lebanon. And as for what you said with the second comment, if I am king, why didn't you come to me until now? There are zealots among us who did not allow us to do this. So you are going to be king. Only a king could destroy the temple, do what you're doing right now. And the reason I didn't come to you is I couldn't. They wouldn't let me. It's not over. Understanding that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was prepared to ask him not to destroy the temple, Vespasian said to him, "If there is a barrel of honey and a snake is wrapped around it, wouldn't they break the barrel in order to kill the snake? In similar fashion, I'm forced to destroy the city of Jerusalem in order to kill the zealots barricaded within it." Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was silent and did not answer. He didn't challenge him. You understand? Vespasian tells him, "I'm going to destroy the temple." And he doesn't say anything. In light of this, Rav Yosef later read the following verse about him, and some say it was Rabbi Akiva who applied the verse to Yochanan ben Zakkai. "I am the Lord who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish," also from Isaiah. As Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai should have said the following to Vespasian in response: "In such a case, we take tongs, remove the snake, and kill it, and in this way we leave the barrel intact. So too, you should kill the rebels and leave the city as it is." So, the later rabbis, including Rabbi Akiva, the one who ended up dying during the Bar Kokhba revolt, said, "No, no. Yochanan ben Zakkai should have spoken about this. He should have stepped up and said, 'Don't do it. Come up with another solution. Kill the rebels, but leave the city alone.'" And he didn't do it. So the rabbis are not pleased with Yochanan ben Zakkai for doing it. And remember, he's their hero because of this next scene. In the meantime, as they were talking, a messenger arrived from Rome and said to him, "Rise, for the emperor has died, and the noblemen of Rome plan to appoint you as their leader and make you the next emperor." At the time, Vespasian was wearing only one shoe, and when he tried to put on the other one, it would not go on his foot. He then tried to remove the other shoe that he was already wearing, but it would not come off. He said, "What is this?" And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Be not distressed or troubled, for good tidings have reached you, as it is written, good tidings make the bone fat." Line from Proverbs. "And your feet have grown fatter out of joy and satisfaction." Vespasian said to him, "But what is the remedy? What must I do in order to put on my shoe?" And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Have someone with you with whom you are displeased come and pass before you, as is written, a broken spirit dries the bones," which is also from Proverbs. He did this, and his shoe went on his foot. Vespasian said to him, "Since you are so wise, why didn't you come and see me until now?" Says to him again, "You're so smart. Why are you coming now?" And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "But didn't I already tell you?" Vespasian said to him, "I also told you what I had to say." Vespasian then said to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, "I will be going to Rome to accept my new position, and I will send someone else in my place to continue besieging the city and wall." And by the way, who is that person? His son Titus. His son Titus continues the destruction and will eventually destroy the temple and will eventually be emperor after him. Yeah. But he says, but before I leave, ask something of me that I can give you. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, give me Yavne and its sages. Do not destroy it and spare the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel. Do not kill them as if they were rebels. And lastly, give me doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok. Rav Yosef read the following verse about him, and some say it was Rabbi Akiva who applied the verse to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. I am the Lord who turns wise men backwards and makes their knowledge foolish, as he should have said to him, leave the Jews alone this time. And why didn't Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai make this request? He maintained that Vespasian might not do that much for him, and there would not even be a small amount of salvation. Therefore, he only made a modest request in the hope that he would receive that much. And so the rabbis challenge the story. They say, why didn't he ask for them not to destroy the temple, to just end the battle and just be done with it? And the rabbis are disappointed that Yochanan ben Zakkai couldn't get more out of it. But his answer was, that's all I thought I could negotiate. It's easy to second guess him, right? It's easy to say maybe he could have saved the temple, but according to his calculation, his calculation is, I can save Judaism. I can save Judaism by keeping our texts alive. So there's people who don't like that answer. There's people who said, he should have asked for the war to be over. But you could also say he knew the Romans and he knew human behavior enough to know the Romans were not going to end this battle until the Jews were done, until, quite frankly, they got enough out of the campaign to pay for what was a very long, costly battle for the Romans. And that's what happened. The Jews ended up losing millions of people, but also hundreds of thousands of slaves were brought back to Rome to do things like build the Colosseum. Vespasian and Titus built the Colosseum with Jewish slaves. We know it because they said that they did. We also said that we were slaves, ended up being taken into captivity by the Romans. But they took slaves. They took pretty much anything that was made out of metal. All those things that were made out of bronze or silver or gold, all those things in the temple, they took all of that. They destroyed it, but in some cases that meant, tearing down the doors, burning the wood, and then, taking the gold leaf around it. They stripped everything. So it was a complete disaster for which again, for 2,000 years was the end of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, and the last time really a Jewish army ever fought on behalf of the Jewish people. So that moment that's described there, and Yochanan ben Zakkai getting out in the last moment, it no longer was a religion based around a place, but religion based around a practice, a people based not on a location, but on something much deeper, which is a system. Now, this is the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism, really. Again, it already began, but it's the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism being the form of Judaism that we have for the next 2,000 years, where the rabbis essentially won. Now, in the remaining time that we have together, I want to kind of get to some very important points to understand how we come out of the fact that we survived is to some extent already a miracle. The fact that we survived the Roman onslaught, it's unbelievable. Nobody else did. There's entire peoples that disappear from history because the Romans destroyed their homes, and ended. And we don't even know their names because unless the Romans kept some record of where they lived, we have no idea what happened to them. And so the fact that we survived is nothing short of a miracle, and is a testament to Jewish survival. But this period now that happens after immediately after the war is the rabbis established this first academy in Yavne, this place that's right near Tel Aviv along the coast. And that academy there lasts for about 20 years before it's moved up to the Galilee. And we've been to those cities on our trips before. Sepphoris, um, Beit Sha'arim, and Tiberias. Those kinds of places become the center of rabbinic Judaism in the land of Israel. And they will be for about the next 200 years. The, the parts of the Talmud that we've read really get to this kind of chain of transmission that the rabbis saw themselves inheritors that goes back before the rabbis themselves, right? They saw themselves as being the inheritors of a tradition that goes all the way back to Moses. And the part of this that we've read a couple of times, but we'll just read the very beginning of it right now, is the beginning of Pirkei Avot, which again takes us through this this chain of transmission that gets us to it gets to the rabbis. So one second. Any questions or anything of what we covered so far? Because
Hi, Esther.
Hi, Mary. How you doing?
Good. Hopefully he'll be back.
I
I
guess
was
so.
just
I was
thinking, it's
still,
awfully quiet.
that's weird.
That's weird.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was gonna say hi, Esther.
Hi, John. I checked the e-blast twice and it says online or at temple. So,
Well, you made it. That's all that matters.
yeah, but first I went to the temple.
Oh.
Mary, where's Mike? Is he driving?
No, he's sitting right here. He's listening.
Oh, I would think he'd be in his car listening.
No, we took it for a ride today.
You should. It's awesome.
I gather you got a new car.
Yeah.
Nice.
He's back.
apologies. That was just as I got to the good part, I realized my computer was not plugged in properly and died. So apologies for that technical glitch. Just as I got to the big part, which is the fact that um, I wanted to show you the part of the Talmud that actually discusses this text. But hold it one second. But yeah, I was asking though if there were any questions, if anybody had any questions on the war itself before we kind of move out of that. So the rabbis establish these learning centers, and part of what goes on in these centers is that they write the Talmud. And here's the tractates of the Talmud, which, as you can see, deal with the first part of the Talmud, what we call the Mishnah, is broken up into 6 books. And then again, for those who are with us, the class on the Mishnah and the rabbinic literature is there in our previous class. I think it was like the second or third class. These are the tractates in the Mishnah, and then there's 2 versions of this. We have the Babylonian and the Jerusalem versions, which are extensions. The Gemara are the extension, the discussions on the Mishnah, and we have 2 versions of it. And we normally follow the Babylonian Talmud, which is interesting because you'd think we would follow the one in Jerusalem, but the Jerusalem one was really for Jews that lived in in the land of Israel. And for people who lived outside of the land of Israel, the Babylonian Talmud was the authoritative text, and that's the one that lasted for the Jews for 2,000 years. Is kind of the authoritative text, or 1,500 years, because that was the text for Jews that didn't live in the land of Israel and had to figure out how to practice Judaism, not so much in the land of Israel, but but in the diaspora. And so the Jerusalem Talmud is studied a lot more now because it has agricultural laws and things that pertain strictly to the land of Israel, which of course people need to know now. Now that we have a homeland again, now that we have a place where we can do things like grow Jewish crops again and figure out how we take care of the land during the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year for the land. So there's discussions now in the Jerusalem Talmud that we follow. But again, we have a whole class on that, the discussion about Jewish law, the rabbinic texts. But we're going to look at this text right now, which is the text that has to do with what the rabbis were doing when they have discussions and when they have debate. And what's interesting is that the rabbis would debate different sides of an issue, of a halakha, and it was difficult in some cases to know without having a discussion about it. And sometimes the discussions were quite intense. And what's interesting about it is the rabbis actually say that the discussions, that the debate is very important. And there's a very famous line I'm going to share with you, which is as they were arguing about differences of opinions. And hold on one second. I think I must have passed it.
Rabbi, when you have a second, I do have a question
Yeah,
about the previous
yeah,
discussion.
please. Before I get on to this, yeah.
I have a question too.
Okay, please. Yeah, let's do the questions now before we look at the Talmud itself. Yeah. Yes, John.
Sorry,
Hello?
I had to unmute. Maybe, maybe, hold on, I've got to get my players, my actors correct here. Hold on, because I did a little bit of study based on while we're studying. Maybe Zakai, he didn't request what the other rabbis wanted him to request from Vespasian because one, he knew he probably wouldn't get it, and two, as long as they saved the sages, right? The they could preserve the educators, the scholars, so that the Jewish religion wouldn't be killed, or not right, so Judaism could so it could keep going. In other words, he was trying to be as smart like a fox. Like, okay, well, they're going to tear down the city, but they're not going to tear down. Like you can kill the leader, but you can't kill the thought type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they understood that what they were working on was something that could never be destroyed. And again, they knew it because we already had a connection to the text. I'm going to show you when we go back to look at the timeline one more time, I'll show it to you. But with the text will preserve them anywhere, wherever they go, wherever we go, our connection to the text is going to preserve us. So to some extent, time replaces a space because Jewish time, the Jewish calendar, the holidays, Shabbat, doing stuff in our homes for Shabbat instead of having to go to a temple to offer a sacrifice. These changes allow for Judaism to be something that can never be destroyed, never be destroyed. And so the debate, the discussion that goes on, let me just share this, the piece that I was looking at. Again, even in the debate, and maybe especially in the debate, which by the way is something that Brett Stevens actually threw into his long, it's not long actually, it's 30 minutes, but into a much bigger issue. I want to say it's long because you need to listen to it and it's not long. Is that he said that one of the things that we have in Judaism is we have a sense of curiosity, a sense of inquisitiveness, and we also have the ability to have debate. And it's okay. Not only is it okay, it is valued in our community. And this is one of the most famous places that idea is preserved. It says, Rabbi Abba said, and some say that Shmuel said, or that Shmuel said, for 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, the two great houses during this time that are already arguing while the temple is still in existence. These said the halakha is in accordance with our opinion, and these said the halakha is in accordance with our opinion. Ultimately, a divine voice emerged, which is a bat kol. We don't see those a lot in the Talmud, but it's basically God speaks very rarely, but sometimes God's voice comes out and proclaims, and this is one of them. Both these and those are the words of the living God. However, the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. So Beit Hillel is right, but they're both right, and they're both the words of God. And so we keep the debate, both sides of the argument alive. And it's the same thing we do in our country when it comes to the Supreme Court, where the minority opinions are also preserved. Because sometimes we go back and say, oh, wow, they saw that back then and they knew that this was going to be a problem. And the minority opinion actually captured an idea that was really important. And that happens also in these debates that we have in the Talmud and that we have later on in Jewish tradition, where maybe we don't follow this tradition, but there's something of value to that. So this line, these and those, right? These and those. Elu ve'elu. It's right here. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim. Chaim.
Rabbi.
The living God. Just remember that. Elu ve'elu. And you'll see that in discussions in the Talmud to this day, amongst rabbis to this day. Elu ve'elu. That's all they need to say. These and these. They're both right. They both are holy, even though they're divergent opinions. That is something that we have to balance as Jews, which other people don't. They don't. They say, well, that's not the answer. Well, no, we say, well, that's maybe not the answer we follow, but it's also not a wrong answer. Yes, Philip. Sorry.
Yeah. So Bernice was Jewish, right?
You're talking about the Bernice that was part of Josephus's wife, or you're talking about
no, the concubine of Titus.
You're talking about you're talking about Titus's girlfriend.
Right. And she brings her to Rome and she's Jewish, right?
Yeah. So according to the most recent, one of the more recent Roman era mini series or limited series, yes, she's a Jewish woman who is part of the priestly families and is connected to the Jewish leadership, and she becomes Titus's consort, if you will. Yeah.
Do we know much about her or what role she played in all of this?
And we believe that that's the relationship was established. We don't know, it was not his official wife, that we know, Titus's wife, and again, according to the Talmud, Titus is a pretty bad dude and deserves a horrible death, which according to the Talmud is that he has a gnat go into his brain and eats his brain away. And so the only way that he can get any peace is if somebody hammers on an anvil, which silences the gnat to some extent. But the rest of the time, he goes through this horrible pain. And while he succeeds his father Vespasian, right? So Vespasian died in about 10 years after he conquers about 5 years after he conquers no about 10 years after he conquers Israel, Judea, he dies. His son takes over, Titus takes over, but Titus only lives for 2 years later after his dad. Titus dies in 81. So he was the one who finished off the siege. An interesting guy to some extent. And again, Josephus talks about his affair. and Bernice was actually Agrippa's sister, one of the last members of the Herodian family as well. Um, and you know, it was you know, he did not live very long. I'll tell you how old he was when he died. He was 42 when he died. So he, as much as the rabbis maybe imagine how he died as a terrible punishment for what he did, um, we know that he died some kind of fever. The Romans, report that he died of some kind of fever, and you know, we don't really know. We don't really know how he died, but he did not live much long after his dad, and he died pretty young.
I have a
Um,
question.
yeah,
It doesn't make sense to me when you're saying these and those. Or, I understand saying both opinions are valid, are valuable, but not that they're both right.
yeah. Well, here's the issue. Judaism has a tough take on truth, which is that, and some people don't like it. I like it, but some people don't like it, which is that we have a hard time, and actually Dennis Prager's talked a lot about this too, that it's very hard to say that this is the way that it always has to be, right? This is the way the rule is, and it doesn't change. The reality is situations change. And sometimes the way we enforce one rule is not the way we enforce the rule in another situation. And so if we don't allow for there to be some type of situational answer, now again, sometimes the answers are wrong. It's not like every answer, Esther, is right. But sometimes there's a truth to several different kinds of answers. And rather than just say, well, that's wrong, you could say, well, maybe it's not applicable now, but it might be applicable later. And so there's things that we could say that are, and again, some people call it situational ethics, but you have to sometimes say that, and again, maybe it's not necessarily situational ethics, but an answer. So when Akiva, gets mad at Yochanan ben Zakkai for what he did 60 years before. Remember, Akiva's a kid, a baby when this happens.
Mhm.
When Yochanan ben Zakkai's alive, when he calls Yochanan out for doing what was needed to survive, that's an easy thing for him to do to some extent, Akiva. Well, we know he ends up dying fighting against the Romans himself, so he has no issue with it. That he's true to his principles. But look, maybe we need a Rabbi Akiva, and maybe we need the guy who also can find a compromise.
But
And
didn't you
so,
say it was God who said?
well, that's
Well,
what
then God
Yochanan,
should know which is right.
that's what Yochanan ben Zakkai says.
Okay.
That's what Yochanan's answer. He finds proof in the text. Now, of course, you know, Vespasian doesn't care about the text, and that conversation was probably very, very embellished by later Jews. Remember, the story is written in the Talmud. It's written hundreds of years after. It's not written by somebody who saw that happen. But look, Josephus has a similar story that he says he had with Vespasian too. So maybe one of the things that Jews did was kiss up to Vespasian so that he protects them. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, but it's easy for somebody later on to say that guy was a traitor. And maybe like in that moment, that was not a traitorous thing to do. Look at it in a different situation and maybe another situation where you go, you don't do that. And so you could say, hey, when you're in a situation where it's life or death and you have no other choice, you make concessions. But
Mhm.
other times you don't make concessions, and they're both valid. And you got to preserve them. Look, I I I my great grandfather was a major labor organizer in Minnesota in the 1920s, and he helped a lot of people, and he helped a lot of people in Minnesota because he was an advocate for unions. At a certain point, there are things that the unions did that didn't help our country. I mean, it's just a fact. It's not like every union's bad, and I don't think that there should be unions, but there was a certain point where the unions helped to some extent destroy, business in this, the manufacturing business in this country. I mean, you can't really deny that. I mean, you'd say, well, but there was a time and place for the unions to be front and center and to help American labor not employ 10-year-olds. So you don't say, well, the labor movement was horrible. You say there was a point in time where maybe there should have been a balance to it. So, we see those things all the time in our lives where people go, and we do it right now. I mean, there's people who I understand where they're coming from when they talk about, what Israel should have done during the war. But when you're in the middle of a war, there's decisions you have to make that are based on a war. They're not decisions that you make when there's not a war. When there's not a war, you don't cut off electricity to Gaza. When there's a war, you can make the argument you have to cut off electricity. You're in battle with these people. So there's situational ethics or situational rules or there's situational engagements that, I mean, you can't deny that. You can't say, well, this is always the right way. And I think Judaism recognized that disagreement's not a failure. It's part of our system. Because if we have disagreements and we keep the disagreements and they're what Brett Stevens calls, and we've talked about it, arguments for the sake of heaven. Those are the words that he used. Machlochet l'shem shamayim. And we say that the arguments of Hillel and Shammai are machlochet l'shem shamayim. They're arguments for the sake of heaven. What are not the arguments for the sake of heaven? We say the arguments that we have in the Bible with Korach. When Korach had a revolt against Moses, the Bible doesn't keep the argument. And the Talmud says the reason why we don't know what the argument of Korach was because it wasn't important. He was just trying to take power away from Moses. And so the Torah doesn't keep it. But when the Torah keeps an argument, or when the rabbis kept an argument, of course, is what they're saying. When we see what the argument is, it's an argument for the sake of heaven. It has real importance, and both sides have a truth. And so the rabbis did something really, really special with that. And again, I don't want to say that's the only thing they did, because we really, I've mentioned it, but I really want to get back to it as we finish, is they created a portable Judaism. They created a Judaism that was no longer based on a place and on something that could be destroyed, and that again, it's no longer a religion of priests. It's no longer a religion of a priestly hierarchy. And to some extent, Judaism becomes, and Brett Stevens also talked about this too. It's why, again, just listen to it, please, because there's so many ideas in there. It's only a half an hour, and he just hit on everything. He talked about the meritocracy that exists within Judaism, and the fact that Judaism, the rabbinic system was, and there are dynasties. We talked about it. Hillel creates a dynasty, the Hillel dynasty, that goes all the way to Judah Hanasi. It's not like there weren't families that kind of had a little bit more power, but there were always rabbis who asserted themselves, and some of them came from nothing. Rabbi Akiva comes from nothing. According to some sources, his father wasn't Jewish. According to some sources, he had no money. All of these kinds of ideas about who he was, all are at the basis is he had nothing, and yet he became one of the most famous rabbis. And that's because Judaism also created a rabbinic system of meritocracy, where the people who studied and the people who were able to excel in understanding the legal system and applying the legal system became the leaders. And it was based on their capability, their mental acuity, their capabilities, and not on who their father was, for the most part. For the most part.
I
And
must
so,
have missed the beginning. Did you give who Brett Stevens did this when?
yes, yes. So I'm sorry. Yeah, this was before we officially started the class, as we talked about it. I'm going to put it in here. He did an address to the 92nd Street Y. Philip listened to it. John listened to it. They were like, "Why have you not listened to it yet?" Finally, when I got around to being able to be in the car and not, I started listening to it, and I it I I'm gonna post it. It was from 6 days ago. It's 34 minutes. I'm gonna put it right here in this, but
This is the bariatric gelatin
nope,
bedtime
that's not what you need to hear. That's the commercial. Anyways, I'm going to put it right here in the chat. And
If It's really powerful. It's
Where
probably
does
the
it
most,
where does it appear? I mean, where do you
Well,
listen?
I just put it up here.
Okay.
So if you touch on that, it's again, it's just over a half hour. And his central thesis is that Jews need to stop trying to convince people. We have to stop convincing people who hate us to like us because it's not working. And instead of we need to focus our attention on other places and our money and our time and our effort, and that we need to look at some of the hatred directed at us as a badge of honor. When people who are messed up hate you, it means you're doing the right you're doing the right thing. Stop trying to convince people who are insane that you're okay. And again, we just saw it this week. You saw it on the left, you saw it on the right, you saw what happened with Carrie Prejean Bowler, whose husband is Kai Bowler, who went to Hart High School and then went on to the Ravens, and he's married to a lunatic who decided to, and she got herself kicked off of the Religious Liberty Commission, thankfully. But yeah, she decided to go on a rant, Candace Owens supporting rant, and she got thrown off of the commission, which again is, I'm only telling you in the context of what we're reading about right now. This is this is all relevant because it's still playing out today. And literally, if you want to understand why the rabbinic, why this time that we're talking about is so critical, again, it's the beginning of the Judaism that we have today. It's also the beginning, and we'll talk about it next week, the divergence of Christianity that comes out of this period. And it really does give us the, I think, one of the foundational principles of Western civilization, which is, again, what are the ethics, what are the morals, what are the values of a people that transcend a location? Does America exist without this land that we live in? Absolutely. Absolutely. Could an America be made in outer space? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's based on a concept and it's based on a system that is that transcends national boundaries. So, um, you know, if you think about how similar these ideas are, it's definitely something that this is why this period is so important. So all of these things are now they're already up. The rabbinic period is up on it's up on our it's up on our website. Let me just show it one time as we come to an end here. Next week we're going to look at the Middle Ages and the next 1,000 year period, which is the Dark Ages, and it's a Dark Ages for the Jews, and it's a Dark Ages for most of the world because just a couple hundred years after Jerusalem is destroyed, Rome will be destroyed. And once Rome is destroyed, the linchpin of the system that keeps everything going comes to an end. But let me just show you real quick where you can find so let me just show this to you real quick for the previous classes and for where this stuff is. If you look right here, this is where it says TBA Online. This is the page that says TBA Online. The Genesis classes are also, you can link on wherever you are. But when you want to look at few past classes and materials, all of our classes are always up on our YouTube channel. But this not only has the YouTube channel, it has the YouTube class, but it also has the texts for the stuff that we read. So the class isn't on there now because we're just finishing it now. But later tonight, hopefully this class will be up here, just like last class is there with the text that we talked about today. So as I said, I mean, you can look at this revised timeline, which is kind of where we got to today. And the fact that we've moved from a collapse of our temple to a text and to a law and to the debate of such law that will allow us to continue to be the people that we are. And I would say there's a direct line between, a lot of people say, well, the rabbis of today are a direct connection to the rabbis of previous times. I would say not really. The people who are really the inheritors of the rabbis right now there's one rabbi who's on the line right now, which is me. But the real people who are like the rabbis of the Talmud and the rabbis of this period, and the rabbis for most of the last 2,000 or at least 1,500 years are the lawyers who are on our line right now, and there's more lawyers than there are rabbis. So I would say we have really the rabbis with the people who went to law school and who understood the importance of law and how law needs to be studied and why law needs to be continue to be argued and discussed, and why there's case law and all those kinds of things. Yeah, they're really the inheritors of the Talmud. So the reason why so many Jews are lawyers is not because we gravitated to some part of the economy, but it really is because this is where we naturally feel at home, which is understanding law and representing plaintiffs and and discussing and debating and finding truth in the text, which is the Constitution, but also all the wonderful books that lawyers have on their shelves. So again, a salute. Thank you to the people who have dedicated at least part of their lives to studying law. And with that, friends Roman, friends Romans, and countrymen, thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks, Rabbi.
We're glad you
Clark.
were here.
doing this, Rabbi.
Thank you. And apologies to Esther for
Oh, that's
bad,
okay.
bad communication, but we got you. In the end,
Okay,
you
from
missed
now
me.
on, I'm checking before I leave to
No,
the
I know.
house.
All right. Take care.
That's okay.
Good night.
Good night.